What is the significance of where you're buried? Who determines how you're buried? In Africa, a variety of burial systems exist, and this has been a source of conflict when a loved one dies, as people scramble to figure out how they should be buried. Welcome to the Summon, the African Summon, where we connect you to Africa and African culture. In today's edition, we'll be talking about the significance of where you're buried as it obtains among the people of Com. And we have with us Dr. Alasambom Nyingchuo to talk to us on this critical subject. Be sure to invite your friends, neighbors, and loved ones and join us for this wonderful conversation. While you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like our videos, and share. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about Com and the people of Africa, where you come from.
Okay, thank you very much. I come from Com, which is the kingdom. It is the kingdom in the northwest region of Cameroon, Central Africa. Com is one of the most prominent tribes in the northwest region of Cameroon, and they have been known across history as a warrior tribe. And I think they gave the biggest headache to the Germans during their penetration into the hinterlands. It took the Germans 9 months of fierce fighting with several captains killed before Com was dominated and the Fon fled into hiding. So I think that Com has made a lot of history through the Afua Com and through its food, its dances, and a lot of traditional regalia that is being used all over Cameroon today. So I think today we can say that Com has come of age and they have positioned themselves within the big boys in Cameroon and in Africa. Thank you for having me once again.
Thank you, Doctor. So with regards to our topic, what's a burial site?
Well, a burial site is simply an area designated for the burial of loved ones. So it varies from community to community, from institution to institution. Families have different ways of designating a burial site. Churches have burial sites. Councils and city councils, local government council, they have a system of designating burial sites, and so on and so forth. So simply put, it's just where the deceased are buried.
Talk to us about some of the ways in which the people of Africa or your people have been buried, going all the way from the things like cremation happen, or where do people get buried? Give us examples, please.
Now, cremation definitely, to the best of my recollection, has never really been the practice in Africa. But what I know about is, as normal burial, every head of the compound designates where loved ones would be buried. Usually, the parents, the mother, the father, and other bigger members of the family are buried in front. Meanwhile, children are buried behind their houses. At the palace, or where there are chiefdoms, you have a royal burial ground where successive leaders are buried. And then you have maybe the palace burial ground, the general palace burial ground, where other members of the palace are buried. So actually, a lot has not changed over time, except in royal households where the Fon or the chief was expected to take some people along or some possessions to use, which they thought he would need in the afterlife. For example, in some fondoms in the Northwest, the Fon used to be buried along with a certain number of virgins, maybe slaves to serve him in the afterlife, and so on and so forth. But with westernization and the advent of the modern notion of state, with its dissuasive forces like the police and the gendarmes and the law courts, some of those practices have been forcefully weeded out. So today, royals are no longer buried with other human beings. Sometimes, maybe, they still bury them with some materials that they think they'll use in the afterlife, but not human beings. And also, with the advent of urbanization, rapid urbanization, and the emergence of large cities and inter-village and community migrations, a lot of people die and it is impossible to trace where they come from. There are also mass killings during wars and other mishaps. So the phenomenon of communal burial sites has propped up in cities and in other communities. And here they typically bury people whose family has not really been identified, or families that cannot be able, either for financial reasons or for some other physical challenges, cannot ferry the corpses of their loved ones to their villages of origin. But besides this, the way people have been buried in Africa over the years has really not changed much. Yeah.
So you talked about some being buried in the compound, in front, or in the back. Is there a significance to why someone will be buried in the front or somebody will be buried in the back? And who makes a determination? Who picks that site where the person will be buried?
Okay, starting with burying some people in the front and some in the back. I think every compound has a family head. And besides the family head deciding, it is already part of the customs and traditions, and it's common knowledge that the father of the house or the mother of the house is buried in front of the house. So if you get into any compound in Africa and you see a grave in front of the house, it's either the father of the house or the mother of the house, or maybe the grandfather of the compound. But as for children, they are buried behind the house, and that decision is taken by the father of the compound. But then it's also common knowledge. Yeah. So when I say children of the compound, it doesn't really mean children in the literal sense. If you never move out of your father's house, even if you die at 70, 80, 90 years at a ripe old age, you'll be buried behind the house. Yeah. So that's how it happens. Because typically there's a hierarchy even among the dead. Yes. Then usually the decision as to where somebody should be buried is taken at two levels. You have the individual himself. Yeah, in Africa, when somebody gets to a ripe old age, which usually starts from 60 years, and they have children who are well-to-do, daughters who are already married and well-to-do, they already start preparing themselves to when they will transit to the world beyond. And they start talking, telling the immediate family, the extended family, what they will want to happen when they die. Sometimes they even already allocate the place where they are supposed to be buried, and they give all the instructions as to what has to happen, such that when they die, there is no debate as to where they should be buried. Also, if the person does not give any indications as to where they have to be buried, either verbally, which is mostly the case, or in written form, the immediate family needs to take that decision. And in this case, communing with the dead in Africa is a physical issue. It's about communing or reuniting over the grave where the person was buried, to report certain things to him. Sometimes they implore certain things. Sometimes they send messages to him to carry to God Almighty or something. Sometimes it's just a child reporting to the father that he is not doing well and the father should look over him sometimes. So it's a physical thing. It has to be either over the grave, or there has to be a contact with a piece of clothing, or worst case scenario, a picture. Yeah, so when somebody dies without indicating where they have to be buried, the children and the immediate family, they have to bury this person at least on their ancestral land, because they would imagine that it is better for the person to be buried among his ancestors so that they can commune together. Because there is always ancestral land, and this the ancestral land is always dedicated to the spirit of that particular lineage. And the fact that a lot of the people from that lineage has been buried on that land, there's a kind of spiritual laying of claim to that particular piece of land. So it has a spiritual significance to the descendants of that lineage. So inevitably, the extended family will decide to bury the person on that ancestral land. Yeah. But sometimes with rapid urbanization and due to access, sometimes you find people getting buried in community graves in the cities, especially when it is not possible to get to the village. But be sure that the children of that family will always gravitate towards that grave to commune with that particular ancestor. Yeah.
About religious options, what options are there? What options have propped up in the religious sector for burial options?
Actually, I will talk specifically about the Roman Catholic Church, because it is the church that is noted for creating burial sites within their premises. There are lots of them in Cameroon, for example. You can't see a Catholic church without a burial site. Sometimes it's so large and expensive with so many beautiful tombstones that it looks like a miniature city. Yeah, so with the advent of Christianity, for example, some people have become Christians and they have become so committed with the church that they decide to be buried in church. And this is due to the fact that their notion of communing with their descendants in the afterlife has changed from the traditional setting to the religious or Catholic setting. So when they get buried in church, the church cemetery, there are regular services by the priest for the repose of the soul of the dead. And when they do this, by extension, that service is attributed to all those who are buried in the cemetery. So the Christian imagines that if he gets buried there, each time they say mass for the dead in that church, their souls will benefit from that grace. And if they are still in purgatory and on their way to heaven, maybe it will shorten their journey or something. So that is why you have a lot of Africans being buried in church cemeteries nowadays. And of course, if the children are also Christian, they'll always also go and pray on graves in the churchyard, put candles and everything and so forth. So that's a new phenomenon that has come to Africa with the advent of Christianity. And I must say, it's not a small phenomenon because it's very extensive. And I could say about 20 to 30% of Africans now adhere to that system of burial, especially in a context where a lot of Africans grow up in urban spaces where they are completely disconnected with their villages of origin. So they are not imbibed in the traditional ways. Their only sense of spirituality is the church. So inevitably, they get buried in church cemeteries. Yeah.
What are some dynamics or considerations that come in when someone dies? I know we're talking about the duality or the various dimensions of a person that could affect, that could create conflict when they die, or could create challenges in the decisions to be made, say they're government official, they're Catholic, like you mentioned, or they're part of the notables in their village. Could you talk to us about some of those dimensions and how they play out when they die, and what you would offer as advice to people in those kind of situations, please?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I think it's a very interesting one. I believe you are referring to the multi-dimensionality of Africans today, especially people who are very influential in the society. I have been to Nigeria, I've been to Ghana, I've been to Gabon, I've been to many African countries, and this phenomenon cuts across. When people become influential in the society, they belong to several spiritual dimensions at the same time. For example, you can have somebody who is a general in the army. At the same time, he is the president of the village secret society, the Ngumba or the P-Fund. At the same time, he's the president of the parish council of his church. And sometimes he also belongs to lodges, secret societies, and so on. And these are highly spiritual societies that have their own beliefs as to how someone needs to get buried when they die, who should be involved in the burial process, and what that really entails as far as the person's life after death is concerned. So in cases, most of these people, before they die, they actually put it in their will, or they say orally to their entourage where they want to be buried and who should take charge of burying them, because he is aware that each of these principalities has specific ways, burial processes that do not necessarily tally with the other principalities to which it belongs. So when you see in Africa, somebody has died and there is a scuffle after he dies as to where he should be buried, as to who should take charge of the burial, it's almost always the case of somebody who belongs to all these different spiritual platforms, but unfortunately did not specify which one should take care of his burial process. So you see somebody who is a general in the army. The army is also a very strong ritualistic. When I say ritual, it doesn't mean spiritual. If you do something repeatedly in the same way, it's a ritual. So the army has a way that they bury their dead, especially those who are in high rank. They have to put the flag of the nation on the coffin. They have to take charge of the mortuary, transport in the military truck, gunshots at the burial, soldiers in uniform lowering the corpse, and then there are rituals in front of the, well, I say social rituals, no, not spiritual ones. And at the same time, the church has its own way of taking care of the corpse from the mortuary to the compound and to the burial. At the same time, the traditional authorities have a way that they intend to bury their dead, to be sure that he has transited in the way that gives them confidence that he has gone to the right place that he's supposed to go after he dies. So you see that there is a conflict of interest when this person dies, because each of these societies come to his burial expecting to take charge. You know, so these are things that happen very often in our African societies. And trust me, it doesn't happen with poor people. It's always rich people. So there's one thing that I can say. I think that the overarching driving force that leads to these couples after death is greed. It's greed. If you are in Africa, stick to one spiritual platform, you know, because usually influential men want to amass a lot of wealth, and they want to harvest from all the spiritual platforms. They want to be a traditional leader so that when they go back to the village, they will eat all the goats and the fowls during ceremony. They want to be a government minister so that they can get money for contract. They want to be church person so that they can have all this. So it's good to reduce greed. Yes, because greed is what leads people to subscribe to all these platforms. And trust me, the people that suffer are the immediate family. Because in the midst of grief, watching all this wrangling over the death of a loved one only intensifies the grief. Yeah.
Make a statement as to what you would like to happen when you die, because even if you belong to several platforms and you say it, I would imagine that the African tradition respects the wishes of the dead, right?
Exactly. Like I said, decisions are taken at two levels. And the decision of the deceased before he dies, if it is well known to be true, that he is the one who actually took that decision, either orally or in written form, once it is well known, it takes primacy over any other decision. So if you make known that this is how you want to be buried and where you want to be buried, even the army will stand down, even the traditional societies will stand down, even the church will stand down because they respect the wishes of the dead. But you need to make them known to avoid strife after you die, especially when you belong to a plurality of platforms. Yeah.
So tell us, do people in Africa talk about be buried? Do they talk about their death? What should be done? Do they let their families, friends, and people know what they would like done? Or is death so sacred they will not say a thing about it? Or is there an informal way to do it, which is not conventional, but is no less the communication that's necessary? Please talk to us about that.
Well, I think that death is not a secret thing in Africa. And most Africans are not shy to talk about death because they know that death is inevitable. And they're also very concerned in what happens after they die and what happens to their legacy. That is why when a man, for example, approaches 60, he starts giving out a lot of information as to what he would want done when he dies, where sometimes they will even designate the exact spot where their graves should be dug. Sometimes they would indicate who should own what when he dies. They will indicate who should be the official family successor and all of that. And sometimes they do it in very light-hearted manner. It could be over a meal, and they don't put a lot of severity on it. And sometimes some children hear it in passing, but they don't put a lot of attention to it because they don't want to put in their minds that no, daddy is going to die. It's only when he dies that some of these things start ringing in their heads. But at least it still serves the purpose because it reminds them of what their father wanted them to do. Sometimes the man knows the next in line in the family, knows the person that will take over the mantle of leadership in the family when he dies. So there are one-on-one meetings in which he actually gives very clear instructions as to what should be done when he dies. And he knows that this man is strong enough to take it. But he will not say it directly to his wife and children. He will just make insinuations or make some jokes or say certain things that will stick in their subconscious, but he will not make a huge deal out of it. For some people who are lucky, especially from the African belief system, those who have led a good life and they die in their ripe old age, sometimes they know when they are going to die. See, an old man of 82, 83 years, he knows when he's going to die, especially if he led a good life. So on his dying bed, he will gather his children and tell them certain things, gather his brothers and tell them certain things. So you see that after this type of person dies, there's little or no strife when he dies. Usually, when somebody is in his 40s, he's not preoccupied by death. And that's where maybe decisions as to where he should be buried and what should happen are taken by other people, because he will probably not have had time to be telling anybody anything, because death was not in his one of his preoccupations. But I think that there's one common thing that guides the decision of people. It's never taken arbitrarily. Yeah, every family has what they call ancestral land. It's either they've done some incantations and rituals on the land that connect that piece of land spiritually to their forebears, and the presence of several tombs of their ancestors actually kind of claims that land for that lineage. So it is only but normal for somebody of that lineage, when he dies, wherever he is, they should ferry him to that particular spot and bury him among his forebears. So that's a de facto compass that directs people to where somebody needs to be buried. Except in cases where there is war, there is conflict, roads are bad, and the family is poor. Transporting corpses usually in Africa is not an easy affair. So some people can decide to bury in urban community graves and so on, but there's always some specific landmarks that are done so that the family can always go and commune over the grave from time to time. Yeah.
You bring up a very important point there. And I was just thinking, how significant is it for the location to be chosen at the location sometimes chosen to communicate the manner in which a person was buried? Because in case someone hangs themselves, in case someone dies in an accident, in childbirth, when there are those unfavorable events that surround the passing of a person, the African community tends to bury them, say, in a particular way, to be able to say this is not something they want, or it's not, they didn't die well. So there's another form of burial that takes place. Talk to us about those, please.
Well, usually suicide is an abomination in Africa all over. It is an abomination to take your own life, no matter the reason. In the past, people used to be banished from communities. When they banish you from a community, it means that you and your descendants have been severed from the community, and you no longer have rights to belong in that community. It's the same thing that happens when you take your own life. When you take your own life, you have been banished from the community. So you don't even have right to be buried in your ancestral land. In most cases, they will just go and dig a grave under the tree or under wherever you committed suicide. Well, in those days, suicide was always on tree branches. But now it's inside houses. Sometimes somebody will just hang from the ceiling fan and so on and so forth. But the truth is that when you do that, the traditional community considers you as ostracized because you committed an atrocity. Sometimes, since the church does not recognize that, they can take the person and bury, in which case neither the family nor the traditional council would protest, because the person already banished himself. So wherever he is buried is no longer their prerogative, is no longer their concern. But the church talks about corporate works of mercy, which includes burying the dead. So nowadays, people who commit suicide invariably end up in church cemeteries or in local government or city council cemeteries because they are not pertaining to a particular cultural or village culture. So those suicide injunctions will not appear. So, but when they bury you in the community cemetery, some people put it in a derogatory manner that you were buried like a dog. You are buried like a dog because you're not buried among your forebears. So you are not with your ancestors. Uh, your family people cannot see you when they want to. They will really have to travel before they come. So you are buried like a dog. You are buried in the bush. Because any place that is out of your ancestral land is called bush. So you are buried in the bush. Yeah, so that's it. But I don't know, the rate of suicide seems to be rather climbing due to westernization, urbanization, loss of family land, joblessness, poverty, and hardship. So most suicides do not even happen in villages anymore. People who are stressed, the majority of people who are stressed and who commit suicide live in urban spaces and probably live among people who do not even understand the cultures where the person comes from. So they will simply, once his people from his village uh, refuse to take charge of his body, the city council or whoever will take charge and it ends there. Yeah, so that's approximately what happens nowadays. Yeah.
On a more upbeat note, so how important is it for Africans to consider it valuable to be buried in Africa or buried in amongst their to be buried in their compounds, so to speak?
Well, I think that it is better to tackle this question within the backdrop of the fact that a lot of Africans grow up in the diaspora, like in Europe, in America, in Asia, Japan, Dubai, or even when they are on the continent, they are in urban spaces, which are not very different from living out of the continent. So they give birth to children that grow into adults with very little touch from their roots. So I think that it is important for such people to insist to be buried back home in their villages because it will serve as a contact point between their kids and their roots. Just for example, if you grow up in the US, you give birth to children in the US that are US citizens, and at the end of the day, you are buried in the US. So the children know where their mother or their parents have been buried. So they always go there to put flowers and so on and so forth. What will really ever motivate them to come back to the continent, go back to their village, go back to their ancestral land, and even have a chance of witnessing how life happens where they come from, and have a chance of breathing the air of their ancestors and getting imbibed with their culture? The highest they can do is when they come to the continent, they come and end at the urban areas because they really don't have any reason to go to the village. And the mere fact of getting buried in America has severed that family line from the village. Except maybe in cases where they have very strong and close relatives in the village. For example, aunties and uncles who are very close to them, whom the children may be tempted to visit, and who entertained very good relations with the parents and the siblings when they were still alive. And if the kids that grew up in America had excellent relations with their cousins and sisters and so on back home. That could be a strong point, but it can never be as strong as their parents being buried on their ancestral lands. So I think that it is very important for African elites in the diaspora and in urban spaces all over the continent to understand that choosing to be buried back home is good because it's going to help their children and it's going to direct them back to the village and avoid them getting lost in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question somewhat.
Oh, it does. It does. In a world where the African is looked down upon around the world, and often when you travel, you're asked, "Where are you from?" It's a question which is loaded. It's a question which is loaded with saying you're not from here because someone seeing you is identifying you as not belonging.
Yeah.
And so the Black around the world needs to have a sense of belonging. So regardless of the fact that someone may choose to be buried in Asia, choose to be buried in Europe or in the United States, wherever they may have immigrated to, they leave their descendants with the void. I could understand when somebody was taken into slavery and out of their will, their volition, found themselves wandering and trying to find a home, but not when you know where you are from. And then one day you woke up and said, I want to go to work. I want to find a job. I want to make something better for my family. And you chose to go somewhere else. And then you get there and lose a sense of who you are in the process of acquiring wealth. Okay, you said it's important to buy home. It's a great investment to be able to accumulate wealth. But then a house is different from a compound, isn't it? A house is what you buy. You can buy a house in an urban city. That doesn't make it your compound. Your compound is a secret place where your family belongs. And so you get there, you buy these homes as an investment and forget that they're investments and soon start thinking you belong. And questions are still out there, where are you from? But you have mistaken yourself to belonging to those places you've gone to. And now decide, let me buy a burial ground there. You've made a decision that speaks into time. You've made a decision that talks to your children, your children's children, down through the generations, because they're never going to want to leave you. Where you're buried is a statement unspoken, which talks about home, which talks about where they should summon, which talks about where they should gather. So they're not going to go back to Nigeria. They're not going to go back to Kenya. They're not going to go back to South Africa, leaving you there. So now they have reason to, wherever they go to, they want to come back to that place because that's where you are. So automatically, you've now made England your home. You've now made America your home. You've now made, and then they're still being asked, where are you from? And they have no knowledge of where, let's say Cameroon, no knowledge of even the urban cities. Talk less of their people. And this is a chance to talk about the people who are privileged to still be in Cameroon and they are in the urban cities and not taking their children back home. What makes those kids want to go home when you can't take them there to go see the land, run the land, spend the night there? When you die, they may want to come, but they are not familiar with the land. They don't know where their compound, the boundaries are. Strangers have to tell
the extended family
how to move around. You're not doing your family a service by not taking them back to create the bond. So when you're buried, it's still a way of bridging the gap and giving them a sense of belonging, a sense of home. But
exactly,
you're doing so much in this world where the African is being tormented in Africa, tormented around the world, the least you can do is heal that wound by making a strong statement. You belong.
Yeah.
You belong among
Yeah.
the people.
Exactly.
You have a home.
Yeah.
Take me back and bury me among my people. And that will help you as a child know that you belong somewhere. You're not a vagabond. Regardless of what people may tell you, regardless of how you're treated around the world, you belong somewhere. You are loved somewhere, and you can always go back. Isn't that true?
Very true. Very true. Yeah, you couldn't have put it better. Yeah, it's very salient. And I really hope that those watching this program, wherever they are, especially the African elites in the diaspora.
You have any final words for our audience?
Well, I just want to, first of all, thank you for your wonderful program. And I think that it's very impactful, especially at a time when the African diaspora seems to outnumber those that are on the continent. And even those who are on the continent live in urban areas where it's not possible to connect to their roots. So I think that this program is a stitch in time, and I'm hoping that a lot of people will tune into it to be able to learn about the African culture.
Well, I hope that that conversation gave you some insight into some questions you should start having with your family. It gives you some insight into how to handle the prospect of your own death and how to resolve some of the issues you might be facing. If you like this content, be sure to subscribe to our channel, like our videos, and share. And until next time, I'm Manondo Akono saying thank you for responding to this song.